So that's what we're going to be talking about in this chapter, and we're going to move on quickly here. Earliest humans through basically what modern humans are now. So people have been around for about 2.3 million years. Prehistory is the definition means of that word means period before writing was developed. So civilization is also a term that we'll be using a lot, which means when people began to advance culturally and live in cities. So the Paleolithic Age. Now the Paleolithic Age, that is the Old Stone Age. And scientists have learned about how and why humans moved from Africa. Around 900,000 years ago, land bridges were created when a lot of the ocean water was in ice sheets during what was strangely enough called the Ice Age. The land bridges connected Africa with Europe and Southwest Asia and a lot of other places. And you can see a map here where how long it took for all these people to get to different places, but all the way to the Americas. Now, people migrated or moved to different areas primarily to follow food. When I say follow food, what we're talking about is hunting. And if you ran out of food in terms of gathering, then you'd go to a new place where there might be more food. So from about 2.3 million years ago to about 10,000 years ago is known as the Paleolithic or Old Stone Age. Most people got their food from hunting and gathering. Now, obtaining food, people lived in bands and they had short lives, and basically they shared food and helped take care of each other. Home territories were where they actually searched for their food, and bands had to move if food was not there anymore. Women and children gathered, and men hunted small animals with sticks and stones and other things as well. And this would be an example of them going ahead and going after something substantially bigger and much more dangerous, but would feed them for a lot longer. Now, one huge advantage that came along when you were hunting animals or doing just about anything was the ability to make tools. Being able to make tools like sharp sticks and stones helped to make hunting much easier. Because instead of throwing a blunt rock, you're throwing something sharp that can pierce a hide. And this ability was improved over time, and these are some examples of some of the tools that they actually had. Making fire was huge too, because it allowed for a bunch of different things, including cooking of meat, warmth and safety at night, easier hunting, because you can go ahead and freak out animals and then with fire and then get them from the other side when they run away from it, and protection from animals that you did not want to come near you. And seeking shelter and making clothing were also two big major advances. So they dug pits originally. These were the earliest shelters. Lived under bushes, and later people stayed in caves. They started to use animal skins for warmth and eventually developed sewing using things like antelope needles and sinew, which is muscle tissue that's stretched out. And this and also basically the guts of animals, or basically you would kind of use that as thread. So kind of gross, but helpful. This allowed people to move to colder climates because obviously you want to have something covering you up if you're going to travel somewhere where it's not as warm as in Africa where human beings originally started out. Development of language was huge too. Over time, people started to communicate more and more, and they developed a language, and this allowed for cooperation because without language, you can't give instructions to anybody about what to do and how to do it. The earliest humans, well, it's kind of up for debate as to what what point you want to start calling someone human. But the earliest human ancestors are these groups right here, and Australopithecus and people like that. But the earliest one we're going to talk about is Homo habilis, which means skilled man. And then the second one is Homo erectus. So Homo habilis is there, and then Homo erectus that I think somewhere is on here. I see it down here. So Homo erectus means simply upright man who walks on two legs. And then Homo sapiens is up here, and that is modern man, more or less a man who thinks, or close to modern man. There's a couple of branches to that. So two types of Homo sapiens, Neanderthals and Cro-Magnons. Neanderthals used pitfalls and built houses and buried their dead. This would be an example of a Neanderthal. This would be a Cro-Magnon. And yeah, they are a little bit different. Obviously, you'd be able to identify something as close to human a modern human, but they did eventually die out. Cro-Magnons, they were skillful in using tools, including burins, which were chisels, and axes and spears. Artists who created cave paintings and created other art, this is probably for religious reasons. And groups cooperated and hunted together, which obviously made it a lot easier to live. Now, then, the second major early Stone Age is the Neolithic Age. Now, the Neolithic means New Stone Age. Now, the start of farming is really where we got going with what was called the Neolithic Revolution. And we'll talk about this quite a bit. This is just a map that shows where some of the earliest important things that were actually farmed were farmed. So you see here we got rice over here, we got over here we got wheat, barley, lentils, chickpeas, all these different things here. Here we got maize, basically corn and gourds and things like that. So a lot of different things, but not in every place. So certain places definitely had a big advantage. Now, farmers learning how to grow food and herd animals was very, very important. Probably the most important thing in terms of the development of the human species to being able to live in cities and things like that. Because without farms, you don't really have cities, and we'll get to that in a second. Because they probably discovered grain could be planted when they were harvesting, and they dropped some seeds, and then they remembered, hey, I dropped some seeds over there, and now all of a sudden there are more plants there a few weeks or months later, and they realized, hey, we can plant some of these things. And then maybe water them, and eventually this leads to farming as we know it today. Different grains have developed this way around the world. Now, herders, probably the first herded animals, were when they maybe got chased into a canyon and just the people realized, hey, we can't kill them all and eat them all because we're just not that hungry. So why don't we build something to make sure they don't leave and then kill them a little bit at a time. And eventually animals lost their fear and became what was called domesticated or tame. And this led to a wide range of other effects, things like the ability to milk animals and shear sheep and things like that, and use that as an additional source of food. Now, this occurred with different animals in different places. Farming and herding got more food, so the population grew and lived longer. Early villages were basically a place where once you farmed, you could settle in an area because all of a sudden you needed to stay there because the crops were there. You couldn't pick up and move the crops. And if you were herding animals, again, same sort of thing. You'd actually stay in a location. And this is when people start producing food instead of following it. The earliest villages are around 8000 BC around that area. This is, I believe, Jericho, one of the earliest cities. Or it might be Catalhoyuk, which is another early one too. People lived in houses made out of wood, mud, and bricks, and around pastures and fields. And what ended up happening was once people could actually do these sort of things like get enough food, then not everybody had to actually be out there farming all the time, because once you farm, it's a much more efficient way of collecting food. So other people could specialize in other occupations, things like being a potter or a weaver or a metal worker, and this led to easier lives for all and more occupations. Now, originally, the government was probably more or less along the lines of the biggest guy with the biggest, strongest guy got to be in charge, and anybody wanted to challenge him, well, if they won, great, they were in charge, and if not, then they were probably dead. But once they settled in places, one of the main things that they needed to start worrying about was things like land ownership. Because if I spend a bunch of time and effort to set up a field, and then you come along and say, hey, it's my field, that's a problem. So they started to have chiefs to settle these disputes. That ends up being huge. And in terms of religion, then there also ended up being more time to think about man's place in the universe and things like that. So all of a sudden, people would actually have time to think about this stuff, and when they did, they realized that there were seasons and things like that, and they started praying to things like, in particular, the Earth Mother, and this became much more complex over time.